You're listening to the Fairways People podcast, where we share inspiring stories, meaningful conversations, and the voices behind our charity. Each episode offers a closer look at the people and passion that drive us. Hosted by Fairways Managing Director, Gareth Webb.
Hello everyone, I'm Gareth Webb, the Managing Director for Fairways, and I'd like to introduce my first Fairways People podcast. So what is this all about, I hear you ask? Well, Fairways has been established for over 20 years, and we started off as a small organisation with a handful of foster carers and one children's home. We've grown into a thriving children and families charity with now over 500 staff and 17 regulated services across the South Coast. Fairways has been on an incredible journey and has achieved so much. But as we've grown, it's really difficult for staff to stay connected to and really get to know the key people of the charity. The idea of the podcast is to introduce these key people, give a little snapshot and help our staff understand their journey, their roles in Fairways and their why, what makes them get out of bed each day and what made them choose Fairways. So, for our very first episode, it makes total sense to interview our very own Chief Executive Officer, CEO, Mchugh, the person that started Fairways and shaped the charity to what it is today. So welcome, Mac.
Thank you very much, Gareth.
So, Mac, you're going to be the first person on the Fairways People podcast, so I really appreciate your time today. So the opportunity is for people to get to know you, really, to get to know the CEO and how Fairways has come about. So if it's okay, can we start from the beginning? Can you talk a little bit about your background, your childhood and where you grew up?
Okay, yeah, certainly, Gareth. So I was born in 1975 in a tiny little village in Scotland, south of Scotland, called Lead Hills. So it was a former mining village, just a couple of hundred people lived there, very isolated, very cold, tiny little village, like I say, in the south of Scotland. It was I was born to a teenage parent. I think it would be fair to say that my childhood wasn't the wealthiest, to say the least. For those that know a little bit about history, then, for me, I pretty much grew up one of Thatcher's children. So in Scotland at the time, it was a bit of an economic, desolate, barren wasteland with very little jobs, very little employment. So as such, having, mother and stepfather that were, both out of work, as most of the people in the village were, there was just no employment really. It was, I guess, from an adult's perspective, they say it was very poor. A house had, would probably be condemned nowadays. There was, barely no radiators, no central heating, etc. No telephone. We didn't have a car. It was tough, but for me as a child, I didn't even notice any of that because all my friends were in the same situation. That was just the common experience that we all shared. So I didn't actually realise I was poor until, as a young man, joining the Navy just before I turned 17. So I joined the Navy, I think it would be fair to say, to get away from that place, because I didn't really fancy a life where the most I could aspire to do was maybe get a job in the local water board, not to slag off people that work in the water board, but I maybe wanted a little bit more in their life. So I joined the Navy at 16. One of the things that actually I was thinking about this the other day, and I look back, is on the very first day I remember sitting down in the canteen, and I sit down, you walk up and they've got all this food out, in the morning for breakfast. They've got all the cereals are laid out. They've got, the beans, the sausages, the mushrooms, the bacon, the toast. There's as much as you can imagine, and you could eat as much as you want and go round as many times as you wanted. And I remember sitting down at the table with these lads that I didn't know, and they were going, "Oh, look at the state of this food," and everybody was complaining, "Oh, this is disgusting." I thought I was Henry VIII. I thought, this is a banquet. What are people talking about here? I thought, this Navy is definitely for me, I'll tell you. But so people from different backgrounds, I think that brought home to me that perhaps not everybody in the UK lived in such a childhood. But to summarise it, it was a relatively happy childhood. It was a bit Tom Sawyer, playing out in the hills, 6-12 foot of snow in the winter, and digging our own dams and playing in the streams, and in the summer, and it was relatively happy but impoverished childhood, I would say.
That's really interesting. So that's how long was you actually in the Navy for, and what led you to Fairways?
I was in the Navy for under 8 years. It was probably the most formative part of my life, I would suggest. I learned so much about how to do things and how not to do things. I think it would be fair to say that I had a bit of an issue with the authority, and certainly with the abuse of power, which obviously is part and parcel of the armed forces. Um, that said, I had some of the worst experiences of management that I could, that people could imagine. Real authoritarian bullies, who were obsessed with power. But I also had some of the most inspirational managers and leaders that I worked under who I tried to model any future leadership I had on. So I spent 7 years. I didn't have the best disciplinary record when I was in the Navy, and I think I had to realise that I either had to change or get out, and it wasn't likely that I was going to change the way the armed forces operated. So I kind of accepted to leave quite early, and I took a lot of skills with me, as well as some real strong bonds and friendships that I've carried on to this day. So I don't regret my time in the Navy. It was really formative for me. Yeah.
Good. And you sort of you come out the Navy and you become a qualified social worker.
Yeah.
What made you go into social care and social work?
Yeah, well, it was actually whilst I was still in the Navy, I one of my friends, his dad was a prison officer, and that he ran an agency of support workers that were going into local authority homes. And they were after some young fit lads because most of the children's homes were staffed primarily at the time. These were local authority homes with older women who didn't tend to basically the staff running the homes felt that they wanted some younger males to come in to act as role models to some of the lads. So there was myself and another couple of lads that were in the Navy at the time. We just done it for a little bit of spare cash as basically bank support workers. And that when I went in there, I'll be honest, I was a bit of a, I wasn't that different from the kids that were in there. In my experience, I'd got into a little bit of trouble as a kid, got into a lot more trouble when I was in the Navy fighting authority. And actually, I seen that what had happened is with some good mentoring and some good leadership and some good examples, that actually these kids could easily be pushed onto the right track. And I remember one of my first shifts that I done in a Hampshire local authority home. I went on and there was three of us on shift with 7 kids, all lads, and I was on as a new worker, bank support worker with these two ladies, and I asked, "Can I take the kids out?" And they were like, "What?" And I said, "Well, can I take?" I went, "What time do I need to be back? And how long can I go for?" And I remember making a packed lunch, and I took these 6 or 7 young lads down to the river, and we built a den, and we built free swing over a river and some nettles as well, which looking back was possibly not the safest thing to do, but that was it was a great. I just loved it, and I think the lads perhaps. I think would be fair to say that that we had fun, and it was engaging, and it was someone that actually showed them interest, and the staff in the home couldn't believe that these kids that were a bit unruly wanted to go out and do that. For me, I'm sure for most of the staff listening, it's just the engagement, the interest, and the keenness that done it. It wasn't particular skills that I had at the time, but that was the start of it, and I thought, gosh, this loved. I enjoyed doing it. It was good fun. So I've done a lot of support work in multiple children's homes. While still in the Navy, when I left, I worked as a support worker full time in a children's home in Southampton, and then I felt that perhaps it could be done differently. And I thought that, well, if I go off and train as a social worker, then maybe I could run the home and maybe do it better. In fact, one of the staff that I worked with in the home at the time is still working at Fairways, Doreen, and she reminded me that apparently I said, well, do you know what? I'm going to take over this bloody company. I'm going to actually run it properly. Now, I don't know if the second part that was achieved, and you'll need to, other people will judge that, but the taking over took a while. It took about 10, 15 years. I trained as a social worker. I went and worked as a social worker for Portsmouth City Council and then for Basingstoke County and as part of Hampshire, just to get some experience of the other side and the professional side of the children's sector, I suppose. And then I came back and managed my first children's home, and that was just before then Fairways was established, and so that's the kind of potted history.
Okay, so that's really interesting. It sounds like you really found your passion in terms of working in children's services and young people, and you could really relate to that, and you become a qualified social worker, and then
Yeah.
you took over the children's home. And I know the children's home at the time was a part of Cornerstone, which is a
Yeah,
childcare agency. And
yeah.
from there, I guess you broke away and you started off Fairways. So what was the drive and passion about starting up Fairways for you?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. And I don't want to rewrite history here, but I don't actually think that the passion, if I'm totally honest, I don't think that it was necessarily a passion about, you know, what children in the sector. If I'm honest, I think my passion and my drive was, and probably still is, what an organization could be and what it would be like to work for an organization that treated people properly and was run properly. And I guess what I mean by that is I I mentioned where I grew up, and I grew up with two real influential factors around me. So one was the Ravenscraig Steelworks, which, for people that don't know, just got shut at the drop of a hat, and everybody was, thousands of people made unemployed. And I think that what happened then is that everywhere that I grew up, employers, because they had so many staff available, would just employ people at short notice, sack them at short notice, and really just treat them like pieces of dirt. And the employment rights were minimal. And that was horrendous, and but when you look back to the 1700s, there's a place really close to where I grew up called Lanark Mill, and it was the foundation of the cooperative movement, where they built the first schools for the workers. They built them houses. They gave them all these extra benefits, probably more than a lot of workers get today. And they done this in the 1600s, and that later went on, despite all these additional costs, to become the most profitable mill in the entire country. And for me, that said a lot. I thought, well, when I worked at Cornerstone, they were actually going to close the first children's home that I worked in, and they said that it was just impossible to run a home for children with emotional behavioural difficulties. So I said, well, can I please take over this home? But I wanted two things. I wanted to be able to have total control and autonomy over what kids we accepted, how much we charged them, and how much we paid the staff. And my belief was that if we trained and invested in the staff and treated them properly, they'd stay, which would enable us to take more complex children. That would enable that to kind of thrive, and they would both enable each other. So that was the birth of it. So my philosophy, my desire, my vision, if you like, was, you know what, if you can give me the tools to look after staff and train them properly, then I think that we can become an exceptional children's home. And the problem that I had with that is I soon realised that you needed more services than just a kids' home. So all the kids were out of school. So then I had to go and set up an little education unit, and then the education unit had to be registered. So we had to turn it into a school, and then we needed more staff in order to get the economies of scale for training. So I had to open another kids' home. But really, it was always just about the desire of creating that perfect, or what I thought was the best possible experience for the handful of kids that I was looking after. And in order for me to, I guess what I feared was that there would come a point when all the work that I had done on the children's home I was running would be taken over. It would be sold to a private company, and it would all be undone. So I thought, well, I've got two options. We can start a people's revolution, overthrow the state, and then install a socialist country before taking over the world. That probably seemed a little bit too challenging. So I thought, well, perhaps instead I could maybe just have the children's home run by a charity that can't be taken over. So I knew I should have went for that first option, by the way. We wouldn't have had this bloody situation we're in now. But I thought, well, if I can turn this into a charity, it means we'll never be bought out, and that then I can protect and ensure that all the work we do in trying to create a properly rewarded, trained, valued workforce will lead to really good outcomes for young people who deserve the chance that certainly in the sector that I worked in the early 2000s, they didn't have that chance. So I think we've certainly vastly improved it. No one can question that. When I look around some of our new homes and services and see the quality, see the amount of staff that we've got that have been with us from the start, I think that certainly fills me with a bit of pride.
And do you think sort of Fairway, it's been on such a journey when you really reflect back, like you say, the children's homes and schools now and where you got to? But you say your drive was about creating a work or an environment where the staff are valued and looked after. Do you feel you've achieved that with Fairways? Or do you feel on the journey? Or
Um, I don't think it's an end destination, So I wouldn't want to say, oh, that's that done, pack up shop, we've got there. Um, if in 2004, when I became a director and had then got the autonomy that I was after, if someone had said to me then, if they'd have described the position that we're in now, then I would have said then that that would have been it achieved. Yes. But now that we're here, I certainly don't want us to rest on our laurels. I think we can always do more. We can always do better. And it's part of a process. You do, a wise old man once said to me once that life's like an elastic band. If you're not expanding, then you're contracting. There's no staying still. So for me, we expand and we improve. That doesn't mean that we keep, getting bigger and bigger as a company, but we deepen the quality of services, we enhance the level of provision, we improve the outcomes, and we make more staff feel as valued as we know some staff do. I'm sure, there'll never be a situation when everybody feels that we're a great company, but if we keep increasing the number of people and the percentage of people that do, then I think that's what we've got to aim for.
Definitely. Okay, when you really reflect on the journey, it's been incredible. So you've had a few different roles, but you are currently the CEO of Fairway. So what's that entail, Matt? So your role as CEO, what's that?
Yeah,
What do you
well,
do?
so before I became the CEO, I was the MD. I think you help me out here. What's it been? 5 years? 6 years?
It's got to be 7.
7 years. Gosh, yeah, I'm sure it goes fast. Okay, yeah. So 7 years would have been 2018. And I was.
September 2018.
Yeah, I know that. I was just testing you, Gareth. So well done. Yeah, obviously as a CEO, I'm fully aware of the date. Yeah. So it was just before that happened. I was the MD, and I think it would be fair to say that I was overseeing too many services with too much responsibility that meant that I wasn't, doing everything as well as it should have been done, which I'm not beating myself up for, but I would acknowledge that if you spread yourself too thin, then it has problems. What kind of led to me realizing that was doing a wonderful course that we sent all of our board of directors on at the time and our heads of department. And it was a course run by the Institute of Directors on governance. And I realized, if you like, that I was spending 99% of my job as the MD looking inwards to the organization about how we done things better. And what I realized was that was in effect to the total neglect of where do we want to go? Why do we want to go there? How are we going to get there? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? And then also key separate role that people have had this word branded about a lot is governance, which is how do you make sure that you have separate system for checking, ensuring, and improving the quality of the services that you do. So that was the kind of decision that led to thinking, right, I want to separate these roles. There was a geezer that I knew that was as good a manager as anybody I'd met, and in terms of as methodical, as organised, his attention to detail. Who was it? Was it Stacey Webb? No, Gareth Webb. Sorry, yeah. Yeah. So I knew that bringing yourself in that you would not only run that well, but you'd do it better than I was. And I thought that, well, actually, as a CEO, I could perhaps do where my skills, I think would be fair to say I'm more of a creative person. So thinking actually, where do we want to go? What's our plans? What are the opportunities that we can expand upon? And also to improve our governance. So that's a long-winded way of saying that as a CEO, I see my responsibility primarily to be where are we as a charity going? Where are we going to be in 5, 10, 15 years? How are we going to get there? And then a small part of my role is to make sure that our governance is correct and to support the board of trustees in overseeing our governance, and to give you the support on the rare occasion that you need it in terms of the operations, but the same as you would give me the support in terms of where we're going. So that's hopefully an easy way to explain how our roles differ and what primarily mine is.
No, that's really helpful, and I think that's helpful for staff to understand about the role of CEO and about looking where we're headed. And just linking into that, we've got a 5-year strategy and we've got sort of certain objectives we're working towards. But what do you see the vision of Fairways being moving forward, longer term?
Yeah, well, this is something that we're actually working on quite a lot at the moment, and I guess there's one of the things is for the last 20 years, and it has been 20 years, we have always had significant financial hurdles to overcome. So I had to buy out the shareholders. We had to, refinance, to raise the money to buy them out. Then we had COVID, which gave us a real punch in the face. We had all of these things. Now, you'll never be out the woods. There'll always be these challenges, but we're about to move into a different phase now, where in the past we kind of had to grow and expand our level of services in order to just finance us staying still. If that makes sense, because we had to pay out money. We're getting close to that, moving out of that phase now, and I guess this is the real opportunity and the exciting part for me, which is, what's the vision? Well, it's yes, we will expand our core services, but we don't need to expand them for the sake of expansion. For me, I now want us to be looking, how do we add on that little bit extra? So there are other organizations that deliver what we are doing, but they will be paying money out to shareholders. They'll be paying out dividends, etc. We don't do that. Our money's reinvested back into the charity. So what will we do with it? Well, I'm sure that a lot of people will want to know and be reassured that we want staff to be paid well. But actually, yes, we do. But we also want to make sure that what can we do that's going over and above for young people? So for me, things like, how can we build some academic research into the outcomes for young people? How can we make ourselves, a beacon in terms of the sector, and showing and showcasing where these young people come from, and what we can do differently? And also, just what can we do for the local community? I mean, we are a community benefit society. So one of the things that I'm exploring at the moment is, what are the options that we could do in terms of giving back to our local communities? I mean, not massive amounts of money or time, but just so that when we do things like open a new children's home, instead of having a big long list of people objecting to us opening a new home in the area, instead people recognise the name Fairways, and recognise because we've shouted about the successes. So for me, it's challenging perceptions, showcasing what children in care can do, showcasing what Fairways does, and evidencing it through academically based research. There's some of the examples, as well as improving staff pay, terms, conditions, etc., and enhancing our services. So not much, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That's really helpful. I think it's nice to just sort of see about how you want to move forward in terms of research, and give some of the work we do more credibility, and the impact that we can have on the local community. I think is outstanding. So some great stuff there. So I guess just a final couple of questions I wanted to go through. I think it'd be nice for staff to in Fairways to understand, like, the human side of you. Like, what's your values? We talk a lot about our key values: professional, accepting, transparent, and being reflective. What's your core values? If you were like a stick and rock used to get the seaside, and you broke it in half,
Yeah.
what's the core values that run through you? What would you say they are?
Well, I'll tell you what, you said, get to know the real me. I don't know if I can swear. I won't swear, but I'd say, do you know what? Everyone's poo stinks. I know that might sound like a joke, but you know what I mean is, I'll be serious here. As a child, I spoke a little bit about my childhood. I remember some experiences where really feeling looked down upon by people in the community, because my mum was a teenager. I was a single parent family at the time. I lived in pretty much a derelict house. I remember how it felt to be looked down upon. And I bringing that into adulthood, that's probably explains, like a well-balanced Scotsman, I have a chip on both shoulders, but bringing it into adulthood and into what it means to Fairways, it really, really annoyed me, how I used to see and hear people talking about children in care as if they were a different species, and totally oblivious to the fact that they are no different to us or to our kids, and they've just had some bigger disadvantages. Now, when I was in the military, I experienced some, being spoken to like I was dirt on the people's shoes. But I also, when I was close to going off the rails, had leaders who, you know, put their arm around me, gave me some time, refocused the energy that I had into something positive, and held me. And I seen the difference that made. I mean, what we've built at Fairways is because when many people would think, who's that cheeky little so and so, and what's he doing? He's in trouble. The few people that actually guided me in the right direction enabled Fairways to become. So for me, it's the core values are, do you know what? Whether it's staff, And whether that's a new member of staff who's a support worker, or a new director that joins the board, or if it's a new young person that joins the home, do you know what? Everyone's poo stinks. So my values, I cannot stand deference for deference sake. This people that, oh, I'm high and mighty and you must respect me because I've got this job or I've got that job, and or I've worked in the home for this long and my children would never do that. Well, I'll tell you what, I have no time for you, because you know what, as far as I'm concerned, let's talk on a level and let's believe in our hearts that we're all the same and treat people for what they do, not who they think they are.
And I would 100% agree with that. Knowing you for a very long time, you do believe in everyone. You have a lot of trust. You respect people, and you hate hierarchy. People that look down on people, and you call it out straight away. So
and it's nothing to do with me being 4'3". Okay, I'm not 4'3". I'm 5'4" and 3/4. Right. So just so we're clear on that, I don't look down on people because I look up.
Okay, so on my podcast, I want to finish with a generic question that I'm going to ask all my guests. So here it goes. With the current complexity and the chaos in everyday life, we know this impacts on our own mental health and our well-being. So my question is to you, is what do you do to support your own well-being, or what do you recommend to people listening?
Well, as someone who has frequent styes, currently has an ulcer and piles, doesn't go to the doctors. I don't want to be hypocritical here and give advice that I'm not following myself. So maybe I'll be honest and say, do you know what? I need to look after myself better. And I'm saying that now that's going out on a podcast. And I don't think it matters who you are or what position that you're at. We need to all give ourselves a bit more time. We need to realize that all of our jobs are stressful. All of our lives are stressful. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with doing something to help you with that. People might be able to tell that I've had a little bit of a problem with too much energy over the years, which drives my wife to be insane. But it's slowing down. Those that know me will laugh and say, Mac's telling us we need to slow down. But no, seriously, trying to slow down. I do try and watch relaxing things on TV that take my mind off of work. I love spending time with my kids when they're not screaming and fighting and crying. So basically that means when they're sleeping. But quality time with family, I think is for me the best. I think it's the most important thing in life, really, isn't it? That should be the example that we're setting. So quality time with family. I wish I read more. And now that I'm moving back into the area, there's a geezer that I know who I'll definitely be able to whip him at golf. So you're definitely going to get some golf lessons when I move back down, just for relaxation and mental health purposes. I'll make sure people know.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think the key message, what you're saying, is basically look after yourself. It's important, and we only get one life, and it's important you take care of yourself and your family. So, okay, well, Mac, I really appreciate your time today. It's been really insightful. Hopefully for the staff and people listening, you've got to learn a little bit about Mac, our CEO, and a bit more personal about his background and why he does what he does. But again, thanks, Mac, for joining me. And thank you for everyone for listening.
Thank you all. And just to say goodbye, and may the force be with you all.